Welcome to Lesson 5 of the Introduction to Social Security Disability Benefit Programs and Work Incentives. Now, Lesson 5, we're going to pick up where we left off with Lesson 4. We're going to focus more on the Supplemental Security Income, or SSI program. And in this lesson, we're really going to drill down to show you how work affects these programs. So what are we hoping that you will get from this lesson? Well, here they are listed on this slide. Our objectives for this lesson include that we hope you're able to describe the basic effect of earned income on SSI cash payments. And just as a forewarning, there's a little bit of math involved in this, not hard math, okay? Just get a basic calculator and we'll teach you how to do the calculations. They're not that difficult. But what happens is that Social Security applies some exclusions to earned income and then subtracts however much is countable off of the base SSI rate. And we'll get to that in just a minute. Number 2, we're going to identify and describe, and we hope that you are able to identify and describe after this lesson, 4 very specific SSI work incentives that beneficiaries can apply, or that Social Security will apply actually, to reduce how much of an individual's earned income counts beyond the basic calculation. So these are special work incentives that appropriate applicants would need to be identified and then request permission to Social Security to have these work incentives applied. And we'll teach you all that. And finally, we hope that you're able to describe the benefits of something we call 1619B, Extended Medicaid, which is a way for SSI recipients to retain their SSI-related Medicaid coverage even if they work at a level that would cause the SSI cash payment to go to 0. It's a very powerful work incentive in the SSI program, and definitely one of the most important ones that we want you to understand. So before we move to the next slide, I want to make sure that we've drawn your attention to a couple of things. First of all, one of the readings that we've attached here is a wonderful Social Security publication, and it's called The Online Guide to SSI. Now, we attached that to Lesson 4 as well as to this lesson, Lesson 5. The only parts for this lesson that we hope that you've taken a look at is the section that's called Work Incentives, because that really describes how the SSI benefits are affected by paid employment, which is what we'll focus on here. The next thing, in your required readings, or the readings that we suggest, there's a handout that's called SSI Calculations. Now, because there is some math, not scary math, but just math involved in this, there's a calculation sheet which we provide that really holds your hand and tells you exactly where to take certain deductions and whether you subtract or add or divide or whatever you're supposed to do. It's very user-friendly, and it's a standard formula that all CWICs who work in WIPA programs use, and we're providing you with that as well. Now, for this lesson, it's important that you have that handout either open somewhere on a screen that you can see, or that you've printed that handout out so that you can look at the examples of how those calculations are performed for each of the steps that we follow in the training. So the lecture isn't going to tell you exactly how to use the calculation sheet. We'll refer to it, but step by step in that handout, it explains it. So if you haven't pulled that handout out, now's the time to do it. Print it out, read it, because that is some important information for you to follow along with. So with that, let's get a basic overview of what happens in the SSI program for folks who go to work. First of all, you just need to hear me say that the SSI program loves work, loves it. It treats work so favorably. There is literally no reason for an SSI recipient to fear working. There aren't many things about Social Security that you can say always and never about and have it be true, but in the SSI program, it always pays to work. Individuals in this program always come out ahead by working. So that's the really good news. That's the overview. Now, something to remember, because the SSI program is means tested, right? It's an income support program. they're most interested in when a person got paid. When did you get the paycheck? And it's for that month when the paycheck is received. That's the month that those earnings will count. It's not when you earned the money, it's when were you paid. Now, your SSI cash payment can go up and down and up and down depending on how much countable income you have for any given month. And if you'll remember from the last lesson, the check that you received today typically reflects your earnings status or your countable income status 2 months prior. Something to make sure beneficiaries understand. But when your earnings or your countable income go up and down, your check is going to go up and down as this information is reported to Social Security. So again, it's something for beneficiaries to be aware of. Social Security will often, when you go to work, if you have that kind of job where your earnings vary, Social Security will often ask you for an earnings estimate, a monthly average, per se, that they can use, because it's a lot easier for the beneficiary and for Social Security to not be adjusting a check every single month. That's kind of chaotic. But if they can use a good earnings estimate, something maybe a little high, you don't want to estimate low because you might end up getting overpaid that way, but an estimate that is at the high end, they can apply that until the next redetermination. Remember how there are periodic redeterminations in the SSI program, and at that redetermination, they will ask for your actual wages, and you submit that if you haven't already, and then Social Security will settle up. Perhaps they owe you a little bit of money. Hopefully you haven't been overpaid. But that is something to know. In some field offices, they would prefer to use an estimate if wages are going to fluctuate. In other offices, they ask that you do submit that data on a month-by-month basis and will adjust the check month by month accordingly. There is some variance there. So what is the basic effect of earnings on SSI? Well, here's the math part. They start with your gross monthly earnings, and gross means before they take the FICA, the Medicare tax, the federal, state, all those taxes. So it's before all that. They subtract a $20 general income exclusion. It's called the GIE. Remember all the acronyms. And if unearned income is received, if this particular beneficiary has a form of unearned income, the general income exclusion is applied to that first instead of to the earned income. Okay? But if the person has nothing but SSI and they go to work, the first deduction that's taken off of the wages is $20. That's the general income exclusion. Next, Social Security will subtract something they call the $65 earned income exclusion. Now, as the name of this exclusion clearly states, this is exclusion for earned income only. This is not an exclusion that can be taken off of unearned income. This is only for wages or self-employment income. So they take $20 off, they take $65 off, and whatever is left of the countable income there, they divide by 2. So you're left with what's called countable earned income. Now, if you also have unearned income, Social Security will add your countable unearned income to your countable earned income, and together that gives them a figure that is called total countable income. And they take that figure and subtract it off of your base SSI rate to determine how much your SSI cash payment will be adjusted, typically reduced. Okay, and remember, that adjustment will take about 2 months to occur. So here's a really simple way to explain this. Now, you have to be careful because if an individual has a complex situation and their SSI cash payment is already being reduced, maybe there's unearned income in the mix, there might be deeming, some complication, then you'd kind of want to steer clear of real simplified explanations like this. But for your basic SSI recipient, someone with no complication, they're getting the maximum amount, federal FBR. A simple way to explain what happens when you go to work is to say, the first $85 that you earn, 85 because you got the $20 exclusion and the 65, that equals 85, right? The first $85 that you earn each month doesn't count, right? It's disregarded. Anything you earn over that $85, Social Security is going to take $1 away from your SSI check for every $2 that you earn. And if you look at the math of that, what that means, the SSI recipient has more money in their pocket by working than they had simply being on SSI. And that is the power of the SSI calculations and all of the exclusions that SSI recipients are permitted to take and to come up with that total countable income, and that's what your SSI check is reduced by, okay? This is all really good news. And we love to use the calculation sheets as a tool with beneficiaries because it's powerful. You can show lots of examples. So if you earned this amount, here's what would happen to your check. If you earned this amount, here's what would happen. And at the end, you always show the person, let's add up everything. Let's count your wages. Let's count your adjusted SSI cash payment. Look, you have more income. There is no more powerful tool to really show how much the SSI program loves work than by using the SSI calculation sheet and show example after example to a beneficiary. This is what the WIPA projects do. This is a really powerful illustration that we use. So I want you, if you've printed out those handouts that I gave you, there is a little scenario, the very first one, and it's going to show you or explain to you the basic SSI calculations. And you're going to want to read that really carefully, and then maybe try it on your own. Get your little calculator out and maybe change around some of the circumstances so that you can practice a little bit and get used to using the calculation sheet. Now, I want to warn you about something. The calculation sheet is designed in a very specific way. Things are listed in a very specific order. If you're going to use the SSI calculation sheet as an illustration, you absolutely may not change it. You must use it the way that it is provided to you in these materials, the way that the WIPA projects use the calculation sheet. If you change it, then what you'll come up with won't be correct. It's really important that you use the tools that we provide for you the way that we provide them. So here's some more good news. In addition to the basic SSI calculation that disregards over half of a person's earned income, the SSI program also includes 4 really important specific work incentives that can provide additional deductions for certain eligible people. Now, the 4 work incentives that I'm going to explain to you are very specific. Some people can use them, others can't. Some people might be able to use more than one, but not so for others. It's very individualized. We're going to give you a basic overview of these work incentives. We're hoping that you'll come out of this with an awareness. We want you to spot people who might be good candidates for these work incentives, but there's no expectation that you would actually facilitate the use of these work incentives yourself. What's the whole point of these work incentives? It allows SSI recipients to work and earn more, which is what we want, right? We want people to earn as much as they're capable of and to retain as much of the SSI cash payment as possible while they're getting accustomed to working and building those work skills and hopefully increasing their earnings capacity. The whole purpose of these work incentives is to ease the transition from dependence on the benefits to a greater financial independence through work. And that harks all the way back to lesson 1 when we first started to talk about that. This is the illustration of that goal, that overarching goal that we have. And using these work incentives makes that happen. So what are these 4 work incentives? Well, here they are. We have something called the Student Earned Income Exclusion, the SEIE. Here's one you've seen before, the Impairment-related Work Expense, or IRWE. And it's exactly the same as the way we taught you in the Title II program. It's just the way it's applied. You actually get to insert the expenses in the calculation sheet. So it works a little differently than Title II, but the same kinds of expenses would qualify. There's a special work incentive in the SSI program for individuals who are statutorily blind, and that's called blind work expenses, or BWEs. And then there's a very complex but incredibly powerful work incentive that you may have heard of before called PASS, or Plan to Achieve Self-Support. And we'll give you a very quick overview of that. So let's jump in with the student earned income exclusion. Now, this work incentive is only available to SSI recipients. Remember, we've got the door shut. These are not available to the Title II disability beneficiaries. There's different rules for SSI than there is for the Title II disability benefits. And the student earned income exclusion is only available in the SSI program. Now, this is a work incentive that has an age limit to it. You cannot be more than the age of 22. It's for young SSI recipients under the age of 22 who are regularly attending school. And, you know, the details around that can get a little complicated in terms of what Social Security counts as regularly attending school. We'll cover that a little bit here. And it allows these individuals to exclude a certain amount of earned income per month up to a maximum annual exclusion. This is a really great work incentive. Now, the amounts for this year and prior years are listed for you in one of the handouts under the course readings, the lesson readings. Be sure you print that out because you will see what an incredibly powerful work incentive the student earned income exclusion is. Now, Social Security, when you are a student and you're under the age of 22, and Social Security is aware of that, when you report your wages to them, they will automatically exclude all of your earned income up to the monthly amount that's allowed in that year until you have exhausted the entire annual amount. It's sort of like you start the year with the bank and you start making withdrawals, okay? And so at the end of the year, your bank might be empty, and so you don't get a new student earned income exclusion until the next calendar year, and then you get a whole new bank to spend again, assuming you still meet the requirements. The SEIE figures are adjusted annually, and they only apply for the current calendar year. So remember, don't forget to print those out. So in your SSI calculation examples, we provide you with a little scenario of a person who would meet the requirements for the student earned income exclusion, and it shows you how the calculations, the basic calculations, are affected by applying the student earned income exclusion. So I want you to refer to that. And again, take a few minutes to practice with it. Change the earnings amounts a little bit. Try to get some practice using the sheet. It's not terribly difficult. All right, impairment-related work expenses. We've already covered these in lesson 3, I believe, and it's very similar. IRWs are, there's a recognition within the Social Security system that some people with disabilities may have expenses that they incur because of their disability and because they're working. And these are expenses that a non-disabled individual would not incur. So it's only fair that those expenses be deducted off of a person's wages when Social Security is deciding how much to adjust that SSI cash payment. So in the way that it works in the SSI program, there's a line on the calculation sheets, and if you've been looking at them, you see there's a line where you insert the monthly IRWI amount. And for some people, that might be $20. For other people, it might be $120 or $220. You insert that amount there, and it gives the beneficiary an additional deduction beyond the $20, the $65, and the 1-for-2 offset, which is what Social Security calls it when they divide the balance of the wages in half and subtract that. So the nice thing is that in the SSI program, the work incentive sort of reimburses the beneficiary for a portion of the cost of the expense because it allows the individual to reduce their earnings by the cost of the IRWI. Now, it's really important that you understand this is not a dollar for dollar reimbursement. So if I have $100 of an IRWI in the SSI program, I'm not going to get an extra $100 in my SSI check to compensate for that. It's a math thing. If you look at the way the math works, the deduction ends up being about 50% of the total cost. But here's the good news. It's a cost you would incur anyway, the beneficiary would incur. So if you can claim that expense as an IRWI, have it loaded into the calculation sheet, it reduces the countable earnings, allows the beneficiary to keep more of the SSI cash payment, and the end result is about a 50% reimbursement for that expense. So that's good news, and it's something to keep in mind. The IRWI criteria are exactly the same in the SSI program as the Title II program. This slide should look familiar to you. The expense needs to be related to working and related to the disability. It has to be a cost paid by the individual and not reimbursed. The expense has to be paid in a month. Remember, there are some exceptions. Some big expenses that you maybe pay for right before you go to work. In some cases, those can be prorated and spent over a period of months. And the expense must be reasonable. And remember, that doesn't mean cheap necessarily. It means usual and customary. It needs to be the standard cost for that service or item in your local area. So let's look at an example again. Pull out your handout with the calculation sheets, get your calculator, and you'll see a little scenario again that describes an example of someone who has an IRWI, and the calculation sheets show you where that deduction is loaded, and you'll see the end result there, okay? Remember still, people come out ahead by working in the SSI program, and it's so powerful, even when there are out-of-pocket expenses like IRWIs, so powerful to show the beneficiary how their check would actually be affected and how IRWIs can allow them to keep more of the SSI as they gradually earn more, hopefully over time, and can reduce that dependency on the SSI cash payment. Now, blind work expenses, this is number 3. Remember, there's a big difference in certain rules for people who qualify for benefits as a statutorily blind individual as opposed to qualifying for benefits as a disabled individual who isn't blind. Remember that there are some special eligibility rules and there are some special what's called post-entitlement rules too, and this is an example. In the SSI program, certain individuals, if you're statutorily blind, you can deduct something called blind work expenses. And basically, this allows you to exclude any expense that is work-related. And it's powerful because it doesn't have to be an expense related to the blindness or any disability. So think about IRWIs. Remember, we just covered that. Those have to be impairment-related work expenses. But blind work expenses do not need to be related to the disability. They only need to be related to working. So this opens up the world. There are lots of exclusions that a statutorily blind individual could potentially have approved that a non-blind individual would not be allowed to have under the IRWI work incentive, because the BWI work incentive is bigger, it's broader. The definition of the kinds of expenses that are deductible is more broad. So on the next slide, I believe we have some examples, of BWIs. And you'll see how different this is. So a powerful BWI is state and federal taxes. That's amazing. That would never qualify as an IRWI, would it? Because yes, that's a deduction. It's something that's caused by working. But it isn't something that's related to someone's disability. We all have state and federal taxes withheld from our checks. But for a statutorily blind individual, that is a deduction. It's an allowable deduction. It's powerful, you see? Union dues, mandatory pension contributions, uniforms, reader services. Now, some of these examples are definitely disability related, but not all of them. So something to understand, if you're working for someone with someone who has statutory blindness, those individuals, if they're on SSI, they would never claim IRWIs. because anything that would count as an impairment-related work expense would also count as a blind work expense. And blind work expenses financially are a better deal, all right? And it has to do with where the expense is taken. So I'm going to push you to the next calculation sheet. Pull open your handout, take a look at the example of the person who is claiming a blind work expense. You'll notice that the line where you take this expense comes in the calculation sheet after you divide by 2. But if you look on that sheet, the IRWI expense is taken before you divide by 2. So what does that mean? That means that instead of getting a 50% deduction on your work expense or your expense, you get close to 100% deduction. So you can see a BWIs are more powerful than IRWIs. It is a better financial outcome to claim a BWI if you can, rather than an IRWI. So just something to kind of tuck away in there, that for a statutorily blind person, you wouldn't claim IRWIs. You would always claim that expense as a BWI. Now again, there is work that has to be done to develop these kinds of work incentives. They're not automatic. You have to request approval from Social Security on the list of expenses that you have, and they involve paperwork, right? You have to keep receipts. You've got to keep track of stuff, right? So you don't have to worry about that as much. This is something a CWIC typically would support a beneficiary with. But if you're someone working closely with the beneficiary, your help with that certainly is greatly appreciated. It's just ends up being a lot of pieces of paper that have to be kept and records and things, and that has to be submitted to Social Security during the periodic redetermination. Remember those? That's when they're checking to make sure, did we process your payment properly? Did you get the right amount? And if you're claiming work incentives, you have to submit your receipts so that they can cross-reference those receipts with the amounts that were deducted during the year or the period of time from the last redetermination. And if you don't have those receipts, it's very likely that Social Security will ask you to pay back that deduction if it was taken. So something to be aware of. Definitely avoidable, but it takes some work. You have to be organized and those receipts have to be kept. So the last one is complicated but really powerful and well worth it if you have a good candidate. Now you've probably heard about PASS, Plan to Achieve Self-Support, and it is a fabulous work incentive. And here's, in a nutshell, here's how it works. You know how the SSI program is means tested. So income that you have that counts if it meets the definition or resources can cause you to be either ineligible or it can cause your SSI cash payment, in the case of income at least, to be reduced. Under a Plan to Achieve Self-Support, if you have a type of income or resource that otherwise would count, you can take that income and or resource, set it aside, and then write a plan to use that income or those resources to pay for items or services that you need to achieve a specific occupational goal. It is an amazingly powerful work incentive. You can imagine, tremendously empowering. It's really a beneficiary using their own benefits, kind of leveraging them to pay for the things that are needed to achieve an occupational goal. But as you can imagine, it's complicated. There's a special form that you have to fill out. Everything has to be thought through. This is a plan. So there have to be incremental steps. There has to be a type of income or resource to set aside, and not everyone has that. The person has to have an occupational goal that will result in either work that would reduce benefits to zero or at least substantially reduce benefits. So this isn't for someone who has the goal of a small part-time job. This is a work incentive for someone who really wants to kind of go big, right? They've got a big employment goal. They need items, services, stuff that costs money in order to achieve that goal. And the PASS plan can be the means to that end. and it is incredibly powerful. But it isn't for everyone, right? So not everyone is a good candidate for PASS, and it's complicated. It takes work. It's a written plan, and it does take time and energy on behalf of the beneficiary to really think it through, to research the things that you need and what they cost. And then once it's approved, and all of this has to be approved in writing up front, you submit this to Social Security. It's reviewed by a very specialized group of Social Security employees. They're called PASS specialists. And then your PASS specialist works with you to refine your plan, and then you work with that PASS specialist as you then implement your plan. But what's so exciting about it is it can really help pay for a variety of things that a beneficiary may really struggle to find a funding mechanism for: education or training. You know, we all know VR will pay for that, but they typically don't pay for everything. Job coaching, other kinds of support services, things like drivers, if you're someone with a visual impairment, attendant care, if you're someone who might need that on the job, job-related items, equipment, tools, expensive things that someone might need to get a job, equipment that you need to start a business. PASS is an excellent, excellent way to help a beneficiary achieve a self-employment goal if the person's a good candidate. And again, not everyone is. And that last bullet, I love that. Just about anything else needed to achieve an occupational goal, kind of the sky is the limit if you can make the case for it. Clearly, this is something that you need, it costs money, and you have the PASS funds set aside. It's possible that it can be approved within parameters. You know, Social Security has some very specific rules about what they're allowed to approve and what they can't approve. And again, this is probably the most complicated work incentive, and we wouldn't recommend that you support a beneficiary in pursuit of a PASS by yourself. Someone who's a good PASS candidate is an excellent referral for WIPA services. So just some additional information. What we love about PASS is that it's empowering, it reflects individual choice. The beneficiary is truly leveraging their own benefits to achieve an occupational goal. It's self-financed. It allows you to take that income, set it aside to purchase the things you need, and then that income is taken out of the calculations that cause the reduction in the SSI cash payment. So that's powerful. It's largely self-directed, although you certainly have oversight from the PASS specialist. There are some basic requirements. There has to be a feasible occupational goal. The earnings requirements we talked about. PASS is not for someone that is really able to work very little. This is for someone with the big plans, right? Someone who really wants to reduce their dependency on benefits or let go of the cash payments. Definable timeframes, countable. You have to have something to set aside. You have to have expenses necessary to achieve the goal, and then you have to complete this rather complex form, which is showing here, the SSA form, SSA 545. That is available on Social Security's website, and we've provided you with that form as part of your resources as well. When you look at it, it isn't terribly complicated, but it's kind of a long form and can be a little intimidating. So in your calculation examples, again, we've provided you with an example of how PASS applies. It's powerful. So for example, let's say I have, some Title II benefit in the mix. I could set aside, I'm a concurrent, right? I also get SSI. If I can set aside that SSDI or CDB in my PASS, I get to use those funds for the things I need to achieve a goal, and in return, my SSI cash payment is increased to compensate for that fund, the money that I'm setting aside in that account. As you can imagine, this is not low maintenance. It's a lot of work, just something to consider. Now, an important point for people in the SSI program is that as SSI recipients work more and earn more, you can see by looking at the calculation that at some point, if you're earning enough, your SSI cash payment will go to zero, right? I mean, eventually, if you have enough earnings, even with the $20 deduction, the $65 deduction, dividing what's left in half, even if you're subtracting IRWs or BWs, that if your wages are high enough, that countable earned income could potentially cause the SSI cash payment to zero out. What beneficiaries need to hear us say is that's okay. Going over your break-even point and having your SSI check go to zero, that does not mean you're terminated. It's very important that they understand that. It simply means you're not in cash payment status. And the next question everybody has is, but what happens to my Medicaid? Because at Social Security they told me that as long as I kept a penny of my SSI-related Medicaid would stay there, and I'm afraid if I don't get a penny of SSI, it's going to go away. That's not true. That's not true because of a very, very powerful work incentive that we're going to cover next called 1619B Extended Medicaid. When you go over your break-even point, you're not terminated. You're not even put in a 12-month suspension period. You go into a special status, okay? This is all codified in law, okay? It's all written and in the regulations, and this isn't new. It's been around for a long, long time. And it really eases that fear of working at that higher level where your cash payment would go to zero. Now, what we don't want to do, again, is frighten beneficiaries about the break-even point. We don't want people to be afraid to earn enough to go over the break-even point and to have that SSI check go to zero, all right? Because if you can earn more money, way more money than you had on that SSI cash payment, that's good. Remember, our ultimate goal is to reduce dependency on the payments, on the benefits, and to increase that financial independence and that financial stability. And clearly, by working and earning more and having more money in your pocket, that's a great outcome, as long as you're not sacrificing health insurance. And that doesn't have to be the case. Now, this important work incentive, 1619B is what we call it, it allows eligible individuals to retain their SSI-related Medicaid indefinitely after the loss of the SSI cash payment as long as certain requirements are met. So you have to, it's not for everyone, you have to meet requirements, but you'd be amazed at how many people meet this. And here on this slide are the requirements, and they're not hard to meet. First of all, you have to have been eligible for SSI cash payment in the previous month. So this isn't, a tricky way to get Medicaid when you didn't already have SSI-related Medicaid is really what that means. You still have to be disabled. Remember the whole medical disability thing. If medical recovery is an issue for a beneficiary, then 1619B won't help them. You still have to meet that requirement that you meet that standard. You have to pass what Social Security calls variably the Medicaid needs test or the Medicaid use test. It's not hard to pass. Basically, you have to have used your Medicaid in the last year. Social Security has a way to actually verify that without even asking the beneficiary. And if the beneficiary hasn't used their Medicaid in the last year, they will contact the beneficiary and ask, do you need your Medicaid if you became ill or injured? And for most of our beneficiaries, the answer to that would be yes. Okay, so you answer that question, you pass the test. Your gross annual earned income, your wages, have to remain below a special number, sort of. Okay, that's called the threshold amount. And every state has a different one. But they're good amounts. So I can tell you in my home state, the annual threshold is nearly $28,000 a year. I think it's $20,900 and some change. So my Medicaid wouldn't potentially stop until I had gross annual earnings of nearly $30,000 in the state of Kentucky. And the assumption there is that, we want to provide that Medicaid support until people are earning enough that they could actually have the opportunity to replace the publicly funded insurance with perhaps a private plan available through an employer. Now, I want to make sure you understand, even if you earn more than the state threshold amount, there are ways where an individualized threshold amount can be determined. So don't let that threshold amount, scare you. Don't think that's written in stone. It's not. Lots of people can retain their Medicaid who have wages over that amount. There's certain calculations that have to be done to see if the person qualifies for that. And the individual has to meet all of the other SSI eligibility criterion, and this is where people get caught up. They still have to have unearned income below certain limits, the resource limit, that $2,000 for an individual, $3,000 for an eligible couple, those still apply in the 1619B program. So individuals who, take their earnings and really sock it away could lose the Medicaid coverage. But here's what we want to make sure we're doing. Retaining Medicaid at all costs, that's not our goal. Our goal is for people to have affordable health insurance that meets their medical needs, right? That's what you have, hopefully. That's what I have. Medicaid is one way of meeting that, but many employers offer excellent health coverage. And Medicaid is not the only way for people with disabilities to get their health care needs met. We certainly don't want people with disabilities to be impoverishing themselves merely to maintain Medicaid when their health care needs could be met another way, right? So something that you really do need to think about there. The benefits of 1619B, pretty obvious. I mean, just is a really major extended period of time that an individual can retain their SSI-related Medicaid. And there is no time limit to 1619B. As long as you meet those requirements that we showed on that slide, you can stay in 1619B status forever. The cool thing about 1619B status is it kind of holds your place in the SSI program. You're not terminated. You're not getting a check, you are receiving your SSI-related Medicaid, and because you're still an SSI recipient, you're just not in cash payment status, you get the benefits of that 12-month suspension period. Remember how we talked about that in the last lesson? If you got fired, you got laid off, heaven forbid, something happened, you lost your job, you're still an SSI recipient. You need to notify Social Security that your wages have now decreased, your cash payment will be recalculated, and will start back up again. See, that's an incredibly powerful work incentive and a safety net that all SSI recipients should be counseled about, because it really relieves that fear that I'm going to work and earn, but I'm not going to have health insurance, and nothing could be further from the truth. Wow, another lesson to the end. And this one was really that up-close personal look of how the SSI program is affected by employment. And as we said in the beginning of the lesson, SSI loves work. And I think we've made that really clear to you, not just in terms of the basic calculations, but also those 4 amazing work incentives that can fit various beneficiaries with all sorts of different needs. All of them can reduce how much of the countable income is calculated, and that in turn can allow someone to keep more of their SSI cash payment as they become accustomed to working, right? It's all about easing that slope so people don't feel like they're stepping off a cliff. So they're getting used to working, their wages are going up, the benefits are going down, and they still have the attachment to the Medicaid. And we reviewed the 1619B Medicaid provisions, incredibly powerful. And now the last lesson, we're done more or less with the technical content. The last lesson is going to help you look at how you and the folks that you work with, perhaps in your agency, can support beneficiaries to understand the effect of employment on their benefits and manage their benefits successfully, and to have a collaborative relationship and a successful relationship with your local WIPA provider so that everyone can work together. Again, it's all about that shared mission that we have to promote employment and enhancing that financial independence and stability. So great, on to the last lesson.
Thanks, Lucy. I will now turn it over to Heidi and Lucy to continue in answering questions. I'm fairly certain you're probably doing a number of those during the presentation. And so if there are a few left, I will let Lucy and Heidi finish that up. One piece, we'll say it again probably in about 10 minutes or so. We will finish at the top of the hour. You will get an email tomorrow that will give you instructions for how to obtain CRCs and CEUs. The email itself comes from Zoom, which is our video conferencing platform. So you may need to check your junk or your spam folder just in case, but you should receive an email from us. It actually contains an evaluation of the webinar, and at the end of the evaluation form, there's a couple of questions about whether you want CRC or CEUs, and then to fill in your email address so the individual here who does that will be able to send that to you. So with that, Heidi and Lucy, I will turn this over to you. So take it away. Oh.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for sticking with us today. I appreciate everybody sending their questions in the question and answer section, and also for your requests for the PowerPoint. I realize that some folks don't have access to Microsoft Documents or Google Documents. After this presentation, we'll be posting a recording of the webinar as well as all the materials. So there will be links to all the different websites that are linked earlier in the presentation and down in the chat box. In addition, there will be the recorded webinar, and the PowerPoint will be available. As Terry said, there will be an email sent out to you that will have information about getting your CRC or CEU credits. That's to come yet. At this point, with our software Zoom, I'm having to email individually to each person who sends me something in the Q&A for the PowerPoints, but they will be available on our website shortly after the webinar is done. If there's substantive questions, please place them in the Q&A. Lucy is answering those for us. Again, you will have all the information available to you. There will be information in the email coming out within the next few days that will give you directions on how to get your credits and access to all of the information that's been presented today. So, Lucy, were you able to look at some of the additional questions while I get folks the PowerPoint through email?
Sure. So we did have an individual ask a question about 1619B. I had a little trouble understanding the question, so I did respond back to the individual, say I want some clarification. She was asking what it sounded like is what happens to people who reside in nursing homes or other facilities in which Medicaid is paying the bill. And wow, 1619B does apply to individuals who may reside in a Medicaid-funded facility if an individual in such facility would be working and would earn more than the break-even amount, so their SSI check would go to zero. The benefits of 1619B do apply to those individuals. Now, those cases get a little gnarly because when you live in a Medicaid-funded facility, you are limited in how much SSI you are permitted to receive, and it's like $30, which is really weird. So if you happen to know or are working with someone residing in a Medicaid facility who wants to work or is working, get your WIPA on speed dial. And these cases are somewhat rare, so I can guarantee you that WIPA will be on the phone to me or their assigned technical assistance liaison to say, uh-oh, I've got someone living in a nursing home or Medicaid-funded facility who wants to work at a substantial level. Tell me what's going to happen, and we'll support that. It doesn't happen that often. So that was, I'm looking through here to see if I see anything else. I'm not seeing any content-related questions right now.
Okay, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to put in the Q&A box right now? Adria, I see that you asked a question earlier. I'm not locating that in the Q&A right now. And I am a little overflooded right now with requests for the PowerPoint. Let me see if I can find the the question. Zoom is not the most flexible platform when it comes to searching all the questions. So if you'll bear with me just for a moment, please, I sure would appreciate it. Hang on.
I'm looking too. I did answer
Okay.
the question.
Thanks. Okay. And I'm unable to copy and paste out of the question and answer, so I'm
I found
hand
it.
typing everybody's email addresses in. So if you'll just be patient with me, hopefully I can get caught up on those. Lucy, I'll turn it over to you to answer that question while I try to get the PowerPoint out for people.
Sure. So this was a sophisticated question. So how do you separate an accommodation, like getting a screen reader or JAWS for work, that the employer provides to you as a beneficiary? You're not paying for it out of pocket, but the employer is providing it. And that's an excellent question. Unfortunately, in the SSI program, there is no work incentive that offers a deduction for anything that you don't pay for. So if your employer purchases something for you, maybe extra supervision, buys you extra equipment, whatever that might be, pays for a personal care attendant, there's no way for you to use that as to decrease the amount that you earn. That there is a work incentive like that in the Title II program. So if you get SSDI or childhood disability benefits, that's called subsidy or special conditions. And you can take the value of that help and use it to decrease how much of your wages count. That is not the case in the SSI program. In the SSI program, it's all about how much money did you receive, how much did you have to spend. It doesn't matter in the SSI program that, you know, someone else is paying for a bunch of services for you, whether that's VR or your employer. That is not relevant at all. And let me keep flipping down here and see if there's any other content questions. All right, so let's see. All right, so
well, Lucy is,
yeah.
sorry, well, you finished faster than I thought. Well, Lucy was looking, but apparently found it already. But I will note a couple of things that Heidi's seriously getting the PowerPoint out to folks. One, we will post it on the site. When you get the email from us, the actual process we ask you to go through is to log into the Project E3 site to complete the evaluation form and then notify us about CRCs or CEUs. Within that site, we have all of the previous sessions recorded, and we have posted and we will post again all the questions and answers that Lucy has answered for today's session. So it's a great resource as you can scroll through the Q&A from all of our previous sessions as well as this session. And trying to think. And then I'll make a couple, go ahead, Lucy.
Yeah, the individual that asked the question about Medicaid that I thought she was referring to someone who lived in a Medicaid funded facility. She has clarified, and it sounds like she's really referring to people who have Medicaid waiver services, who are living in the community, but they have an expanded form of Medicaid that pays for rehabilitation, transportation, employment services, a variety of things. So we refer to those globally as Medicaid waiver programs, and oh my Jiminy Crickets. So when you've seen one Medicaid waiver program, you have seen one Medicaid waiver program. The federal government allows states to create these programs with a lot of creativity and a lot of variance. The waiver programs are complicated. The effect of employment on these waiver programs is incredibly varied. If you have a waiver participant that has come to you and I want to work, please, your WIPA should be on speed dial. Do not ever help a waiver participant get into a job without getting upfront counseling. The worst thing in the world is for a Medicaid waiver participant to lose their waiver services because of paid employment. And it does happen. And it's horrifying when that happens. These services are not available on the open market. You know, there is no replacement for a Medicaid waiver program. Humana doesn't offer, you know, something similar. So typically people in these waiver programs are pretty impacted by their disability. The waiver services may make the difference between literally life and death for certain individuals. They certainly allow people to live in the community as opposed to having to live in a nursing home. And I'm sorry to say that some of the waivers are not very friendly to employment. So everyone is different. Waiver participants should always be referred for individualized counseling with a qualified and trained and certified CWIC. I'm scrolling down. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other content questions yet.
I think we have 2.5, 3 minutes remaining. I'll make a quick note and then check with Heidi if there's anything she'd like to add. Our last session with Lucy will be Thursday, September 26th at the same time. You will, if you're on this webinar, you'll receive a notice about that webinar. If by chance an individual shared an email with you, you can always drop us a note and we will make certain that you hear about it. That's about all I have. Heidi, anything you'd like to add before we wrap up here? Oh, you went.
I guess
oh,
we
you
just
went on.
need
There you go.
to stay online
Yeah.
for a few minutes while I type everybody's names in here to get the PowerPoint to them. I didn't realize my mic was open. I hope everybody's had fun listening to my fingers tap dance. I'm going to go ahead and close my mic down, but I'm going to just keep, it looks like I still have 25 requests in here, and I'm unable to copy and paste them from the chat box. So I need to actually type them by hand. So I'll keep at that, and if there are any more questions in there, then Lucy can take care of them. Otherwise, the webinar will be online probably for a few minutes. Oh my gosh, it looks like I have quite a few of them also in the chat box. So, okay.
I think what we will do, maybe Heidi, before you wear your fingers literally down to like the second or third knuckle.
No, just kidding.
We have everybody's email because you registered. So we will first check with the person who's our registration person to see how we can pull all those email addresses and send everyone a copy of the PowerPoint. It also will be, the literal individual slides will be posted. Again, in a few days, probably next first to middle part of next week, the recording from today's session with all of our wonderful conversation, but also the captioning will be posted on the site. So again, if you have individuals that you may know of that that need captioning during webinars and you think may find this a helpful webinar, it will be captioned and it will be available on our Project E3 site at some point next week. So with that, I have us at the top of the hour.
Just to let everybody know, we do have your emails on file, but another staff member usually takes care of all the mailings. So I've been trying to send the PowerPoint to everybody who's joined us live and wanted to follow along. So it will be sent out to you. I'm just going to go ahead and quick respond to everybody, but you may receive the PowerPoint within a day or so. If anybody wouldn't mind. Yeah, I've tried the Control-C, but the Zoom panel doesn't let me get the email addresses from the question and answer. I can get them just fine from the chat. So thanks for the suggestion. We've been doing these for a while, and there are a few limitations to the platform. For the most part, it's really good, though. So we've been sticking with it and trying to accommodate people as we go. But that's all I have. I will copy down the, I'm able to copy the entire chat. So I'll have everybody's email addresses from there. and I will copy down the rest of people's email addresses from the question and answer if I can, and we'll get that out to you within a day or so. And that's really all I have too. I realize people only have the hour, so thanks so much for joining us, everybody.
As Heidi said, we'll keep it open for a couple of minutes, but the meeting's over. So thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you all on September 26th for the last session in our series. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.